Welcome back, live from Just King's World. On my hip hop ish, we present to you Dope Read. Dope Read is designed to elevate your mind, elevate your thought process, and overall get you back reading. And guess what? We are about to finish the 50th Law by 50 Cent and Robert Greene. We are going into chapter 10, which is the final chapter. The chapter is called Confront Your Mortality, the Sublime. In the face of our inevitable mortality, we can do one of two things. We can attempt to avoid the thought of all costs, clinging to the illusion that we have all the time in the world, or we can confront this reality, accept and even embrace it, converting our consciousness of depth into something positive and active. In adopting such a fearless philosophy, we gain a sense of proportion. Become able to separate what is petty from what is truly important. Knowing our days to be numbered, we have a sense of urgency and mission. We can appreciate life all the more for its impertinence. If we can overcome the fear of death, then there is nothing left to fear. The Hustler's Metamorphosis. I had reached the point at which I was not afraid to die. The Spirit made me a free man, in fact, while I remained enslaved in form. Frederick Douglass. By the mid-1990s, Curtis Jackson felt supremely dissatisfied with his life as a hustler. The only way up and out that he could see was music. He had some talent as a rapper, but that wouldn't get him very far in the world. He felt somewhat confused about how to break into the business, and he was impatient to begin the process. Then one evening in 1996, all of that changed. At a Manhattan nightclub, Curtis, now known as 50 Cent, met the famous rapper and producer Jam Master Jay. He can sense that this was his only opportunity he would have to make the best of it. He talked Jay into letting him visit his studio the following day to hear him rap. There he managed to impress him enough that Jay agreed to serve as a mentor. It seemed that everything now would fall into place. 50 had saved money to tide him over while he moved into his new career, but it wouldn't last forever. Jay got him a few gigs, but they didn't pay. On the streets near his home, he would see his hustlers' friends doing well, while his funds were dwindling to nothing. What would he do when he ran out of money? He had already sold his car and jewelry. He had recently fathered a son with his girlfriend, and he needed money to support the child. He started to feel more impatient than ever. After much persistence, he got someone at Columbia Records to hear his music, and the label became interested in signing him to a deal. But to get out of a contract he had signed with Jay, he had to give him almost all of his advance money from Columbia. What was worse, at Columbia he now found himself lost amidst all of the other rappers signed to the label. His future looked more uncertain than ever. With his savings almost gone, he would now have to return to hustling on the streets, and this made him feel bitter. His former colleagues were not too happy to see him again. Feeling like he needed money fast, he became more aggressive than usual and made some enemies on the streets who began to threaten him. He had been splitting his time between the record studio and hustling, and his first album at Columbia was about to come out, but the label was doing nothing to promote it. Everything in his life seemed to be unraveling at the same time. Then one afternoon in May of 2000, as he got into the backseat of a friend's car, a young man suddenly appeared at the car window brandishing a gun and began firing at him close range. The bullets went all over, 9 of them piercing his body, including one that opened a giant hole in his jaw. The assassin then hurried away to an awaiting car, certain he had done the job with the shot to 50's head. 50's friends quickly drove him to the nearest hospital. As it all unfolded, the event itself didn't appear real to him. It was like a movie, something he had seen happen to others. But at one point, while he was being operated on, he sensed that he was close to death, and suddenly it all seemed very real. A searing light flooded his eyes, and for a few seconds a shadow crept over it. While everything else came to a stop, it was an oddly calm moment. Then it passed. In the months to come, he would stay at his grandparents' house, recovering from the near mortal wounds he had suffered. As he regained his strength, he could almost laugh at the whole thing. He had cheated death. Of course, for hustlers in the hood, this was no big deal, and nobody would feel sorry for him. He had to move on and not look back, while almost keeping an eye on the killers who would be looking to finish the job in the wake of the shooting. Columbia had canceled his album and dropped him from the label. He was surrounded by too much violence. 50 would get his revenge. He would launch the kind of mixtape campaign on the streets that would make him famous, and those same executives would come back begging to sign him. As he geared up for action, however, he noticed that something had changed inside of him. He found himself getting up earlier than usual in the morning and writing songs late into the night, completely immersed into his work. When it came to distributing his tapes on the streets, he didn't care about making money in the present. He couldn't care less anymore about clothes, jewelry, or nightlife. Every penny he made, he poured back into his campaign. He didn't pay attention to all the petty squabbles others were trying to drag him into. His eyes were focused on one thing alone, and nothing else mattered. Some days he would work with an intensity that surprised him. He was putting everything he had into this one shot at success. There was no plan B. In the back of his mind, he knew that it was at that moment near death that had changed him for good. He could still feel the original sensation in his body, the light and the shadows, and it filled him with a sense of urgency he had never experienced before, as if death were on his heels. In the months before the shooting, everything had been falling apart. Now it was all falling into place like destiny. Years later, as he amassed his business empire, 50 began to encounter more and more people playing strange power games. A company that had partnered with him would suddenly want to renegotiate their contract or act skittish and consider pulling out, acting as if they had just found out about his notorious past. Perhaps it was just a ruse to squeeze out better terms. Then there were those at his record label who treated him with increasing disrespect and offered him meager publicity or marketing money in a take-it-or-leave-it ploy. Finally, there were those who had worked for him from the beginning, but now, smelling money from his success, began to make unreasonable demands. Certain things mattered to him more than anything else. Maintaining his long-term mobility, working with those who were excited about not mercenary, controlling his image, and not muddying it for a sake of quick money. What this translated into was simple. He would exercise his power to walk away from any situation or person that compromised these values. He would tell the company trying to renegotiate terms that he was no longer interested in working with them. With the record label, he would ignore the ploy and pour his own money into the marketing of his album, with the idea of leaving them soon and striking out on his own. He would cut loose the former friends without a second thought. In his experience, whenever he felt as if he had too much to lose and he held on to others or to deal out of fear of the alternative, he ended up losing a lot more. He realized that the key in life is to always be willing to walk away. He was often surprised that in doing so, or even feeling the way people would come back to him on his terms, now fearing what they might lose in the process. And if they didn't return, then good riddance. If he had thought about it at the time, he would have realized that turning his back in this way was an attitude and philosophy that had crystallized in his mind that afternoon of the shooting. When death had brushed against him, clinging to people or situations out of fear is like desperately holding on to life on even the worst terms. And he had now moved far beyond such a point. He was not afraid of death, so how could he be afraid of anything anymore? The fearless approach. People talk about me getting shot like it represented something special. They act like they're not facing the same thing. But someday everybody has to face a bullet with his or her name on it. 50 Cent. With the language skills that our primitive ancestors developed, we humans became rational creatures, gaining the ability to look into the future and dominate the environment. But with this good came a bad that has caused us endless suffering. Unlike any other animal, we are conscious of our mortality. This is the source of all of our fears. The consciousness of death is nothing more than a thought of the future that awaits us. But this thought is associated with intense pain and separation. It comes with an attendant thought that occasionally haunts us. What good is it to work so hard, defer immediate pleasures, and accumulate money and power if one day, perhaps tomorrow, we die? Death seems to cancel out all of our efforts to make things meaningless. If we were to give up ourselves to these two trains of thought, the pain and the meaningless, we would almost be paralyzed into inaction or driven to suicide. But consciously and unconsciously, we invented two solutions to this awareness. The most primitive was the creation of the concept of the afterlife that would alleviate our fears, that gives our actions in the present much meaning. The second solution, the one that has come to dominate our thinking in the present, is to attempt to forget our mortality and bury ourselves in the moment. This means actively repressing any thoughts of death itself. To aid in this, we distract our minds with routines and banal concerns. Occasionally, we are reminded of our fear when someone close to us dies, but generally, we have developed the habit of drowning it out with our daily concerns. The problem, however, is that the repression is not really effective. We generally become conscious of our mortality at the age of 4 or 5. At that moment, such a thought had a profound impact on our psyches. We associate it with a feeling of separation from loved ones, with any kind of darkness, chaos, or the unknown, and it troubled us deeply. This fear has sat inside us ever since. It is impossible to completely eradicate or avoid such an immense thought. It sneaks in through another door, seeps in our beliefs in ways we cannot even begin to imagine. Death represents the ultimate reality, a limit to our days and efforts in a definitive fashion. We have to face it alone and leave behind all of what we know and love, a complete separation. It is associated with physical and mental pain. To repress the thought, we must then avoid anything that reminds us of death. We therefore indulge in all kinds of fantasies and illusions, struggling to keep out of our minds any kind of hard and unavoidable reality. We cling to jobs, relationships, and comfortable positions, all to elude the feeling of separation. We grow overly conservative because any kind of risk might entail adversity, failure, or pain. We keep ourselves surrounded by others to drown out the thought of our essential aloneness. We may not be consciously aware of this, but in the end, we expend an intense amount of psychic energy in these repressions. The fear of death does not go away. It merely returns in smaller anxieties and habits that limit our enjoyment in life. There is a third and fearless way. However, note to deal with mortality. From the moment we are born, we carry inside ourselves our death. It is not some outside event that ends our days, but something within us. We have only so many days to live. The amount of time is something unique to us. It is ours alone, our only true possession. If we run away from this reality by avoiding the thought of death, we are really running away from ourselves. We are denying that the one thing that cannot be denied. We are living a lie. The fearless approach requires that you accept the fact that you have only so much time to live, and that life itself inevitably involves levels of pain and separation. By embracing this, you embrace life itself and accept everything about it. Depending on the belief in an afterlife or drowning yourself in a moment to avoid pain is to despise reality, which is to despise life itself. Which you choose to affirm life by confronting your mortality, everything changes. What matters to you now is to live your days well, as fully as possible. You could choose to do this by pursuing endless pleasures, but nothing happens boring more quickly than having to always search for a new distraction. If attaining certain goals become your greatest source of pleasure, then your days are filled with purpose and direction. And whenever death comes, you have no regrets. You do not fall into nihilistic thinking about the futility of it all, because that is a supreme waste of the brief time you have been given. You now have a way of measuring what matters in life. Compared to the shortness of your days, petty battles and anxieties have no weight. You have a sense of urgency and commitment. What you do, you must do well, with all of your energy, not with a mind shooting off in 100 directions. To accomplish this is remarkably simple. It is a matter of looking inward and seeing death as something that you carry within. It is part of you that cannot be repressed. It does not mean that you brood about it, but that you have continual awareness of a reality that you come to embrace. You convert the terrified, denial type relationships to death into something active and positive. Finally, release from pettiness, useless anxieties, and fearful, timid responses. The third, fearless way of approaching death, organized in the ancient world, is the philosophy known as Stoicism. The core of Stoicism is learning the art of how to die, which paradoxically teaches you how to live. And perhaps the greatest Stoic writer in the ancient world was Seneca the Younger, born around 4 BC. As a young man, Seneca was an extremely gifted orator, which led to a promising political career. But as part of a pattern that would continually throughout his life, the gift incurred the envy of those who felt inferior. In AD 41, with trumped up charges from an envious courtier, Emperor Claudius banished Seneca to the islands of Corsica, where he would languish essentially alone for 8 long years. Seneca had been familiar with Stoic philosophy, but now on this barely inhabited island, he would have to practice in a real life. It was not easy. He found himself indulging in all kinds of fantasies and falling into despair. It was a constant struggle, reflected in his many letters to friends back in Rome. But slowly he conquered all of his fears by first conquering his fear of death. He practiced all kinds of mental exercises, imagining painful forms of death and possible tragic endings. He would make them familiar and not frightening. He used a sense of shame to fear of his mortality would mean he abhorred nature itself, which decreed the death of all living things. And that would mean he was inferior to the smallest animal that accepted his death without complaint. Slowly, he exuberated this fear and felt a sense of liberation, feeling that he had a mission to communicate this newfound power on his to the world. He wrote at a furious pace. In AD 49, he was finally exonerated, recalled to Rome, and appointed to a high position as praetor and private tutor to the 12-year-old boy Lucius Domitius Ahimberus, soon to be known as Emperor Nero. During the first 5 years of Nero's reign, Seneca was the de facto ruler of the Roman Empire. As the young emperor gave himself over to the pleasures that were to later dominate his life, Seneca had to constantly struggle to rein in some of Nero's violent tendencies. But for the most part, those years were prosperous and the empire was well governed. The envy set in again, and Nero's courtiers began spreading stories that Seneca was enriching himself at the expense of the state. By AD 62, Seneca could see the writing on the wall and be retired from public life to a country house, handing over almost all of his wealth to Nero. In AD 65, he was implicated in a plot to kill the emperor, and an officer was sent to, in the Roman style, ordered Seneca to kill himself. He calmly asked permission to review his will. This was refused. He turned to his friends who were present and said, "Being forbidden to show gratitude for your services, I leave you my one remaining possession and my best, the pattern of my life." Now he would be reenacting what he had rehearsed in his mind so many years before. His ensuing suicide was horrifically difficult. He sliced the veins in his arms and ankles, sat in a hot bath to make the blood flow faster, and even drank poison. The death was slow and incredibly painful, but he maintained his calmness to the end, making sure that everyone would see that his death matched his life and his philosophy. As Seneca understood, to free yourself from fear, you must work backwards. You start with the thought of your mortality. You accept and embrace this reality. You think ahead to the inevitable moment of your death and determine to face it as bravely as possible. The more you contemplate your mortality, the less you fear it. It becomes a fact you no longer have to repress. By following this path, you know how to die well, and you can now begin to teach yourself to live well. You will not cling to things unnecessarily. You will be strong and self-reliant, unafraid to be alone. You will have a certain lightness that comes with knowing what matters. You can laugh at what others take so seriously. The pleasures of the moment are heightened because you know the impermanence and you make the most of them. And when your time to die comes, as it will someday, you will not cringe and cry for more time because you have lived well and have no regrets. Keys to fearlessness. There seems to hover somewhere in the dark part of our lives an objective, timeless, spaceless element of primal fear and dread stemming perhaps from our birth, a fear about dread which exercises an impelling influence upon our lives. And accompany the first fear is for the want of a better name, a reflex urge towards ecstasy, complete submission and trust. Richard Wright. In the past, our relationship to death was much more physical and direct. We would routinely see animals killed before our eyes and flood our sacrifices. During time of plague or natural disasters, we would witness countless deaths. Graveyards were not hidden away, but would occupy the center of our cities or adjoin churches. People would die in their homes, surrounded by friends and families. This nearness of death increased the fear of it, but it also made it seem more natural, much more part of life. To mediate this fear, religion would play a powerful and important role. The dread of death, however, was always remained intense, and with the waning of the power of religion to soothe our anxieties, we found it necessary to create a modern solution to the problem. We have almost completely banished the physical presence of death. We do not see the animals being slaughtered for our food. Cemeteries occupy outlying areas and are not part of our consciousness. In hospitals, the dying are closeted from sight. Everything made as antiseptic as possible. That we are not aware of the phenomenon is a sign of the deep repression that has taken place. We see countless images of death in movies and in the media, but this has a paradoxical effect. Death is made to seem like something abstract, nothing more than an image of the screen. It becomes something visual and spectacular, not a personal event that awaits us. We may be obsessed with death in the movies we watch, but this only makes it harder to confront our mortality. Banished from our conscious presence, death haunts our unconscious in the form of fears, but it also reaches our minds in the form of the sublime. The word sublime comes from the Latin meaning up to the threshold or doorway. It is a thought or experience that takes us to the threshold of death, giving us a physical limitation of the ultimate mystery. Something so large and vast eludes our powers of description. It is a reflection of death in life, but it comes in the form of something that inspires awe. To fear and avoid our mortality is deliberating. To experience it in the sublime is therapeutic. Children have this encounter with the sublime quite often, particularly when confronted with something too vast and incomprehensible for their understanding. Darkness, the night sky, the idea of infinity, the sense of time in millions of years, a strange sense of affinity with an animal, etc. We too have these moments in the form of any intense experience that is hard to express in words. It can come to us in moments of extreme exhaustion or exertion, when our bodies are pushed to the limit and travel to some unusual place, or observing a work of art that is too packed with ideas or images for us to process rationally. The French call an orgasm le petit mort, or little death, and the sublime is a kind of mental orgasm. and the mind becomes flooded with something that is too much or too different. It is the shadow of death overlapping our conscious minds, but inspiring a sense of something vital and even ecstatic. Understand, to keep death out, we bathe our minds in banality and routines. We create the illusion that is not around us in any form. This gives us a momentarily peace, but we lose all sense of connection to something larger, to life itself. We are not really living until we come to terms with our mortality. Becoming aware of the sublime around us is a way to convert our fears into something meaningful and active. To counter this repression of our culture, the sublime in any form tends to evoke feelings of awe and power. Through awareness of what it is, we can open our minds to the experience and actively search it out. The following are the four sensations of the sublime moment and how to conquer them. The sense of rebirth. Growing up in the suburbs of Chicago at the turn of the 20th century, Ernest Hemingway felt completely suffocated by all of the conformity and banality of life there. It made him feel dead inside. He yearned to explore the wilder world, and so in 1917, at the age of 18, he volunteered as an ambulance driver for the Red Cross in Italy at one of the war fronts. There he felt himself oddly impelled towards death and danger. In one incident, he was nearly killed by exploding shrapnel, and the experience forever altered his way of thinking. I died then. I felt my soul or something coming right out of my body, like you pull a stink handkerchief out of a pocket by one corner. This feeling remained in the back of his mind for months and years to come, and it was oddly exhilarating. Surviving death in a way made him feel like he was reborn inside. Now he could rewrite his experiences and make his work vibrate with emotion. This feeling, however, would fade. He would be forced into some boring journalistic job or the routines of married life. The inner deadness return of his writing would suffer. He needed to feel the closeness to death in life again. To do so, he would have to expose himself to new dangers. This meant reporting on frontline activity in the Spanish Civil War, and later covering the bloodiest battles in France in World War II. In both cases, going beyond reporting and involving himself in combat. He took up bullfighting, deep-sea fishing, and big game hunting. He would suffer innumerable auto and airplane accidents that would only spur his need for more risk. Out of each experience, the sensation of being sparked back into life would return, and he could find his way to yet another novel. This feeling of having your soul pulled out of your body like a handkerchief is the essence of the sublime sensation. For Hemingway, it could be conjured only by something extreme, by a brush with death itself. We, however, can feel the sensation and its reviving benefits in smaller doses. Whenever life feels particularly dull or confining, we can force ourselves to learn to leave familiar ground. This could mean traveling to some particularly exotic location, attempting something physically challenging, a sea voyage or scaling a mountain, or simply embarking on a new venture in which we are not certain we can succeed. In each case, we are experiencing a moment of powerlessness in the face of something larger and overwhelming. The feeling of control slipping out of our hands, however short and slight, is a brush with death. We may not make it. We may have to raise our level of effort. In the process, our minds are exposed to new sensations. When we finish the voyage or task and come to safe ground, we feel as if we are reborn. We felt the slight pull of the handkerchief. We now have a heightened appreciation for life and a desire to live it more fully. The sense of evasiveness and urgency. The first half of the 14th century in Japan was a time of intense turmoil. Palace coups and civil wars turned the country upside down. Those of the educated classes felt particularly disturbed by this chaos. In the midst of all this revolution, a low-ranking palace poet, later known as Kenko, decided to take his vows and become a Buddhist monk. But instead of retiring to a monastery, he remained in the capital, Kyoto, and quietly observed life around him as the country seemed to be falling apart. He wrote a series of short pieces that were not published in his lifetime but were later collected and printed under the name Essay in Idleness. The fame of this book increasing with time. Many of his observations centered on death, which was all too present in the period, but his thoughts around death went the opposite direction in brooding and morbidity. He found in them something pleasurable and even ecstatic. For instance, he pondered the evasiveness of beautiful things such as cherry blossoms or youth itself. If a man were never to fade away like the dews of Adashino, never to vanish like the smoke over Torabiyama, but lingered on forever in the world, how things would lose their power to move us. The most precious thing in life is its uncertainty. This made him think of insects that live for only a day or a week, and yet had crowded such time could be. It is the shadow of death that make everything poignant and meaningful to us. Kenko continually found new ways to measure the vastness of time as it stretched into eternity. A man was buried one day in a cemetery to view Kenko's residence in Kyoto, the grave marker surrounded by grieving members of the family. As the years went by, he wrote, they would come less and less often, their feeling of sorrow slowly fading away. Within a span of time, they would all be dead, and with them the memory of a man they had buried. The grave marker would become largely converted by grass. Those who would pass by centuries later would see it is a weird mix of stone and nature. Eventually, it would disappear altogether, dissolving into the earth in the face of the undeniable reality or the eternal expanse. How can we not feel the preciousness of the present? It is a miracle to be alive even one more day. There are two kinds of time we can experience, the banal and the sublime variety. Banal time is extremely limited in scope. It consists of the present moment and stretches out to a few weeks ahead of us. Occasionally farther, locked in banal time, we tend to distort events. We see things as being far more important than they are, unaware that in a few weeks or a year, what steers us up all will not matter. The sublime variety in an imitation of the reality of the utter vastness of time and the constant changes that are going on. It requires that we lift our heads out of the moment and engage in the kinds of meditations that obsess Kenko. We imagine the future centuries from now or what was happening in the very spot millions of years ago. We become aware that everything is in a state of flux. Nothing is permanent. Contemplating sublime time has innumerable positive effects. It makes us feel a sense of urgency to get things done now, gives us a better grasp of what really matters, and instills a heightened appreciation of the passage of time, the poignancy and beauty of all things that fade away. The sense of awe. We are creatures that lived in language. Everything we think and feel is framed by words, which never really quite express reality. They are merely symbols. Throughout history, people have all kinds of unique experiences in which they witness something that exceeds the capacity to express it in words, and this elicits a feeling of awe. In 1915, the great explorer Ernest Shackleton found himself and his crew marooned on an ice floe near the continent of Antarctica. For months, they floated in this desolate landscape before managing to rescue themselves later the following year. During the time on the floe, Shackleton felt as if he were visiting the planet before humans had arrived on the scene, seeing something unchanged for millions of years. And despite the threat of death this scene represented, he felt oddly exhilarated. In the 1960s, the neurologist Oliver Sacks worked on patients who had been in a coma since the 1920s, victims of the sleeping sickness epidemic of the time. Thanks to a new drug, they were awakened from the coma, and he recorded their thoughts. He realized that they viewed reality in a much different way than anyone else did, which made him wonder about our own perceptions of the world. Perhaps we see only a part of what is happening around us because our mental powers are determined by habits and conventions. There could be a reality we are missing. During such meditations, he slipped into a sense of the sublime. In the 1570s, a Huguenot pastor named Jean Deliri was one of the first Westerners to live amongst the Brazilian tribes in the Bay of Rio. He observed all kinds of rituals that frightened him in their barbarity. But then one evening he heard tribesmen singing in a way that was so strange and unearthly. He was overwhelmed with a sudden sense of awe. I stood there transported with delight. He later wrote, whenever I remember it, my heart trembles, and it seems their voices are still in my ears. The sense of awe can be elicited by something vast or strange, endless landscapes, the sea or the desert, monuments from the distant past, the pyramids of Egypt, the unfamiliar customs of people in a foreign land. It can also be sparked by things in everyday life. For instance, focusing on the dizziness, variety of animal and planet life around us that took millions of years to evolve into a present form. The philosopher Immanuel Kant, who wrote about the Sublime, felt it in holding a swallow in his hands and gazing into his eye, feeling a strange connection between the two of them. It can be created by particular exercises in thinking. Imagine, for example, that you had always been blind and were suddenly granted sight. Everything you saw around you would seem strange and new. The freakish forms of trees, the garnets of the color green, or try imagining the earth in its actual smallness, a speck in a vast space. The sublime on this level is merely a way of thinking, looking at things in the actual strangeness. This frees you from the prison of language and routine. The artificial world we live in, experiencing the awe on any scale, is like a sudden blast of reality, therapeutic and inspiring. Then you got the sense of the oceanic, the connection to all life. In not confronting our mortality, we tend to entertain certain illusions about death. We believe that certain deaths are more important and meaningful than others. That of a celebrity or prominent politician, for instance. We feel that some deaths are more tragic, coming too early or from some accident. The truth, however, is that death makes no such discriminations. It is the ultimate equalizer. It strikes rich and poor alike. For everyone, it seems to come too early and can be experienced as tragic. Absorbing this reality should have a positive effect upon us all. We share the same fate with everyone. We all serve the same degree of compassion. It is what ultimately links us all together, and when we look at the people around us, we should see the mortality as well. This can be extended further and further into the sublime. Death is what links us all living creatures as well. One organism must die so another can live. It is an endless process that we are a part of. This is what is known as the oceanic feeling, the sensation that we are not separated from the outside world, but that we are a part of life in all forms. Feeling this is a moment of inspired, ecstatic reaction, the very opposite of a morbid reflection on death. The reversal of perspective. In our normal perspective, we see death as something detrimentally oppressed to life, separate events that ends our days. As such, it is thought that we must dread, avoid, or repress. But this is false, an idea that is actually born out of our fear. Life and death are extremely intertwined, not separate, that the one cannot exist without the other. From the moment we are born, we carry our death within ourselves and continually possibility. If we try to avoid or repress the thought, keep death on the outside, we are cutting ourselves off from life as well. If we are afraid of death, then we are afraid of life. We must turn this perspective around and face reality from within, finding a way to accept and embrace death as part of being alive. Only from such position can we begin to overcome the fear of our mortality and then all of the smaller fears that plague our lives. When I nearly died, it made me think, this can happen again in any second. I better hurry up and do what I want. I started to live like I never lived before. When the fear of death is gone, then nothing can bother you and nobody can stop you. The acknowledgments. The book is dedicated to my Nana, a woman of strength, power, and great determination. She instilled in me knowledge. There is no knowledge that is not power. 50 Cent. First and foremost, my thanks go to Annabella for her loving support, her depth and editing of the 50th Law, and her other immeasurable contributions to the book. The 50th Law owes its existence to Mark Gerald, 50's literary agent. He brought 50 and me together in the first place. and skillfully guided the project from start to finish. I must also thank my agent, Michael Carsile, at Inkwell Management for his equally invaluable contributions, his assistant at Inkwell, Ethan Bassafoff, and Robert Miller, publisher extraordinaire of the Harper Studio, who plays such an important role in shaping the concept of the book. Also at Harper Studio, I would like to thank Debbie Steer, Sarah Birmingham, Katie Salisbury, Kim Lewis, and Nikki Cutler, and for their work on the design of the book, Leah Carlson-Stanek and Mary Shuck. I would like to thank Ryan Holliday for his research assistance, Dove Charney for his support and inspiration, my good friend Lamont Jones for our many discussions on the subject, and Jeffrey Beckinger, assistant professor in the Improbable Classics Department at the University of Wisconsin at Madison for his scholarly advice. On 50's side, his management group, Violator, gave me tremendous support on the project. For this, I must thank, first and foremost, Chris Lighty, CEO of Violator, and a man behind the throne. Also giving generously of the time were the Settlemars, 50's attorney and business manager, Laurie Dobbins, president of Violator, Barry Williams, brand manager, Anthony Butler, better known as AB, Bubba, and Hove. Special mentions as well goes to Joey P., co-founder of Brand Asset Digital, and to Nikki Martin, president of G Unit Records, for her invaluable insights on 50 from his earliest days in the business. I would like to thank as well Tony Yayo, Busta Rhymes, Paul Rosenberg, president of Shady Records and Eminem's manager, the novelist Nikki Turner, Quincy Jones III, and Kevin and Tiffany Childs over at Don Diva. I would like to give a special mention to George June Bishop for giving me the Southside tour and helping me understand the rich world of hustling. Finally, for the immeasurable support during the writing of the book, I would like to thank my mother, Laureate, my sister, Leslie, and as always, my cat, Brutus, Robert Greene. The end of the book. Okay, we finished the book. The 50th law is done. The 50th law, we completed it. 50 Cent and Robert Greene, how do you feel about the book? How do you feel about chapter 10? Basically, 50 said, by him almost dying, allowed him to live better, basically. Him reaching death and beating death allowed him the realization that life is precious and that he has to live every moment. Listen, that's a true fact. You got to, look, man, tomorrow's not promised. You got to get up and get it. You got to get up and get it. I mean, you got to act now. You got to do it now. You could be all over tomorrow, next week. What have you done for yourself? What are you doing now? Get up and do it. That's what I took from it. Can't be afraid of it because it's going to happen. When you was born, you already knew it's going to be a time that you got to go. Nobody knows that date. So in the middle of that, you got to live life. Give thanks. I'm grateful that we finished our second book. Don't know what our third book is yet, but I'll come back to y'all in a minute once I got that book. But look, y'all read another book. You should be happy. If you sticking and you rock with me, leave a fire down in the comments and we off to the next one.